Welcome back to week 16 of the TRX-4 Sport Budget Build-Off. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to week 16 of the TRX-4 Sport Budget Build-Off. We use the TRX-4 Sport unassembled kit version in this series, and this is the finale. Week 16, we went through and really took this truck from just the box stock kit all the way up to what you see here. And it is kind of crazy that after 16 weeks of upgrades and modifications and running videos, it still really resembles just another TRX-4 Sport. But obviously we've done a lot to it. There's a lot going on underneath of this body. And we've spent a lot of time tuning on suspension and drivetrain and weight balance to get us where we're at today. So for the finale, we're not doing any upgrades this week. We're just gonna kind of discuss what we've got, what we wish we would have done, what we still could do, how the truck really ended up, and if there's anything that I would want to do different if I wasn't constrained to the budget that I had. So if you take and add up everything that we used in this vehicle, minus the actual transmitter and a battery charger, other than those two things, the total cost for what we have sitting here in front of us is just over $1,270. And that is kind of crazy to think of when you look at what we have here, especially as, you know, maybe this isn't even as crazy as a lot of them are. You would think that they would be after 16 weeks of modifications. Now, once you take out the DIY weeks and the running video weeks, that really knocked down some of them. But then we had a couple of cheat weeks, which really upped the budget in those areas. So there is still a lot going on here. Overall, as far as the performance of this truck goes, for what I think it's intended to do, this truck is really doing well. It's much nicer to drive now that we've got some tuning in on it, including the shock fluids like we did. The underdrive and overdrive is some of the largest improvements, and then adding just a tiny bit of weight to the front to get that to stay planted, I think also made a big difference. Getting that huge center mounted battery tray out of there and running a smaller pack up front, while still not totally ideal, really improves things. Of course, you have to run a small battery pack. I've been using an assortment of different ones, but definitely looking at smaller batteries, big improvements to these trucks. There were some things that we did which are pretty much just for style, including the interior and the inner fenders. Those really don't add performance at all. It's just style. We did cut the roof off this and given it the mullet mod, as it was so lovingly called in the comments section. And that got rid of a lot of that top weight. We got rid of all those scale accessories that bolted to the sides. I know some people do like those. For me, I'm more interested in the performance. I didn't completely delete the rack because there's all kinds of pre-drilled holes everywhere. So we left some of it on just so that those holes were covered, and it gave us a pretty unique style. Can't say that I've seen many of them modified in this same fashion. I didn't spend a whole lot of time showing you, cosmetic upgrades or changes. And by saying I didn't spend a lot of time, I mean I didn't spend much time. I showed you how to paint the fenders on the outside of the body, but I didn't even take the time to do the other side. I always planned to get that done. I was trying to get it done before the running video, and I just didn't get it done. So, some people caught that in the running video. Some people caught it in comments, things like that. But, for now, it's that is what it is. You will notice in most of these videos I've done on the bench, you've seen this side of the truck, and that's for good reason. The electronics we used in this truck were really inexpensive, not including that Traxxas 400 servo, but we used the Hobby Wing 1080 ESC and the 21 turn Titan motor. Now that motor and ESC combo fit this truck well. That 21 turn motor is a good motor. There is some other options there. We could have went with a Holmes Hobbies 550 can sealed motor, and that's an inexpensive motor with a little bit more power, and I think the cost is even pretty close. So if I were to do it again, wanted to spend like literally just a couple of dollars more, probably would have went that way, got myself a little bit more powerful motor. But the 1080 ESC was a great choice overall. It came with that nice programming card. We went through all of those settings, and I think, for how smooth it is on a brushed setup with the power that it has, it was a great fit for this vehicle. The one thing I wish I could talk on is the performance of the RC four-wheel drive Goodyear tires that we've got on here, but I haven't ran them yet, so I still don't know. Hoping that they do well. Hopefully we get back to showing some more footage of this truck at some point. I hope to try and take it to a couple events, later this summer, something like that. Maybe try and get a little bit more time on the rocks with it. I really don't have many long-term plans for this truck still at this point, so we'll have to see what the fate of it is. One thing that we never had to touch in this build at all was the transmission that came in this truck. We didn't have to adjust gearing. We didn't have to open it up or upgrade it, anything like that. That transmission is just rock solid and perfect for this vehicle. The outside of the axles are actually still fairly stock. We did put aluminum portal covers on the front axle just to be able to hang those weights on the outside. But beyond that, the backside, the inner C's, the housing, the diff cover, basically that stuff's all stock other than the RIT dye that we did on that red diff cover to turn it black. Beyond that, we haven't had to do any strength upgrades in that area. We did do the chromoly inner axle shafts and machined steel gears, as well as the machined gear set. So we've got the stronger materials in that area. But the lower gears are still stocked all the way around. The rear did get that same chromoly inner axle treatment and machined upper gear in the portal, as well as a underdrive gear in the rear. Now, as far as what I might do differently if I wasn't constrained by the budget or the budget build portion of the build, and that's a tough question because normally I would be trying to build to a purpose of some sort, either for a look or a rule set or something along those lines. And what I do have is this other TRX4 based build kind of sitting here over to my side. And this is that build that I put together using the VS410 chassis and an axial style 3-year transmission with dig. Now, I really like the dig style transmissions. I think it's a super nice benefit, or feature to have as far as performance goes. And that's something that you can't get with a TRX4 transmission. Now, beyond that, it's TRX4 axles, and that's kind of it. So it's like, it's not something that I would necessarily buy a kit like this one and then try and do that. That is basically just taking a set of axles and putting it under some sort of custom build. But what I do like about that is I like being able to get my center of gravity lower and try and take more advantage of the portal axles, but in a better and lower center of gravity setting. And the whole time, that's definitely been the biggest point that I've thought, is that the TRX4 chassis is very beefy. It is, strong, rigid, and just overall built really well, but it doesn't necessarily allow for peak performance in a lot of situations. The TRX4 shocks themselves are fantastic. As far as a kit shock or even the RTR version shocks, like on the TRX4 Sport stock version I've got up there on the shelf somewhere, they're just a really good shock. They perform well, they hold oil fairly well. Initial stiction on them isn't too bad. Once they're kind of freed up, they work really well. And like I said, the transmission that comes in this truck is really strong. But I think the biggest thing is that overall, it's just not a super flexible platform in a lot of ways, just with how so many of those things are really integrated together, specifically the transmission and the skid plate. And then with how everything falls together in the chassis. So I think the biggest thing that would differ would be a chassis. I would either find a custom chassis specifically built to use items that were on here if possible, or I would go the route of finding a different custom chassis and picking components to go with that, to go with TRX4 Sport axles, something along those lines. A lot of people think that the chassis makes the vehicle, and I don't know if I always feel the same or not. A lot of times people do put a chassis on something and then refer to it as, that vehicle. Even if it's got axles from this platform or this one, they still refer to it as the chassis. So I do get it in some respects. For example, if you got a set of replacement rails that went on here and used most of the components of the chassis, but changed the rails just ever so slightly, you'd probably still call it a TRX4. And how far would it have to vary from that before you stopped calling it a TRX4? Maybe you already had aftermarket braces, and then you just get an aftermarket set of shock towers, and then a set of rails that just slightly varies. Is it still a TRX4? Or is it all of a sudden just this slight variance that dictates what your truck is? And at what point does it switch from that to something else. The one thing I didn't do is that I didn't get a final weight on this. I'm guessing that I'm somewhere close to 7 pounds. Probably not much over, if any, but just in that easy, solid weight area. And I think that that is an important thing to note, is that we didn't need to add a bunch of extra brass to try and get performance out of this truck. It may feel like you're getting a bunch of performance when you add that stuff, but you're just going to find those roadblocks in different places when you progress and find harder and more technical trails. And if you are going to add any brass, definitely don't buy anything that goes on the chassis in brass, like cross braces or bumper mounts. If you're gonna buy it, put it on the axle and keep it as low as possible. Try and keep it at or below the center line of the axle shafts as best you possibly can. Probably going to be the best results you're ever going to get with adding weight. These budget builds are always a ton of work. It's tough to stick to a schedule like this. I missed the finale by a couple of days because I actually had a trip planned. I was out of town for a week and I was gonna try and film this finale right before I went out of town, but with the studio being torn apart and kind of coming together like it was, I missed it and wasn't able to get it. So we had to delay it a couple of days, but that's just one example. I think I had all the rest of the videos done right on time. And it's a commitment for a really long period of time to make sure that you always have something done on those days with everything else we have going on, every other project, every other new release, anything else, real life, work, everything. So much work goes into these things. It is just one of those, kind of a sigh of relief when they are actually over. And I'm kind of feeling that this time as well. And I think that would kind of lean into the best question I could think of, is 16 weeks for you guys too long, not long enough, just right? And what vehicle would you want to see next? Part of when we are trying to choose a budget build is that it's a vehicle that's got good aftermarket support, is something that's fairly popular in the market so that it appeals to a good amount of people. For example, probably not going to do something like an HPI Venture, which has almost no aftermarket support, and really there aren't many that exist or may ever exist. So those are just some of the criteria that we would look at when trying to pick the next one. With trucks that are brand new releases, it can be a little bit difficult as well because you need enough upgrades available and enough array to make it different. So that's usually why it's better to wait a while from a brand new release before you do an actual budget build. I do appreciate all of you guys who watched through the series and commented on lots of the videos. I read pretty much all of the comments. I obviously don't respond to all of them, but I do read them and I see your guys' names who pop up week after week, and I appreciate the support from you guys. It's a big part of what helps the channel when you guys are coming here every week to see what we're doing. So again, I appreciate it. In the end, this may seem like something where we just get a bunch of crazy free stuff to do, a series like this, but these series do cost money. They don't make money, and it's just because we like building these things why we do it. This isn't something that I would call a profitable venture. This is just something that we truly do for the love of the hobby. So for week 16, the finale, one last time, thanks again for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the series. Comment any of your favorite parts of the series. Hit the subscribe button so you see whatever we're playing with again down the future, and hit the notification bell so you see those videos as soon as they get released. And for the last time on the budget build off, thanks again for watching. We'll see you.